Welcome to China Tech Talk, a weekly discussion of tech and startups here in China. I am John Artman.
And I'm Matthew Brennan.
And so this week we're really excited to be able to do an interview episode. This week we're featuring Florian Bohnert, the head of international expansion at Mobike. Florian, thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning, guys. Thanks for having me.
Before we really kind of jump into it, tell us about yourself. Who are you? How did you come to China? How did you start working with Mobike?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. Thanks again for the opportunity. This is really exciting, and it's a topic that gets a lot of people's attention. So I'm glad to share a bit more from the inside. Personally, I came to China for the first time 7 years ago. It was towards the end of university, and I had always been attracted to Asia. Not specifically China, but just Asia since I was little. And the opportunity to go to Shenzhen just fell on my lap. So I didn't hesitate a second. I took the offer. I went to Shenzhen and worked as a quality controller in factories for about 6 months. So that was a pretty harsh job, but it was super interesting because I really got an inside look at China, just going to the factories every day and talking to the workers. That was really amazing. And so after I did that for about 6 months, I came back to Europe, and I only had one thought in mind, which was I have to go back to China. So I fought really hard, graduated, and then found a couple of different jobs before I landed in Shanghai 4 years ago. So that was 2013. And in 2013, I founded my first startup with a couple of other French guys. We did energy management. It was an online platform for energy management. And so we did that for about 3 years, raised some funding. And one of the member of the board of directors is the current CTO, is the CTO and co-founder for Mobike. So that's how I got to learn about the Mobike project. And then I jumped on the Mobike rocket ship about a year ago. Yeah.
Okay, about a year ago.
Yeah, actually exactly a year ago.
So your employee number?
I think I'm employee number 40. And since then, it's more than obviously double, tripled. It's maybe a 10, 20, 30 increase. It's grown tremendously as you can see.
So number 40. So did you start off as the head of international expansion?
When I joined, Shanghai had just started. So Shanghai, it was our first operational city, and we launched that on April 22nd, 2016. And since then, we went to over 50 cities in China, and we launched another country, Singapore. So when I joined, it was right at the beginning. We were still trying very hard to get the solution out there, to get the first traction. And at that time, I was focusing somehow on international, but not as much as I am now, obviously, because there was still a lot of groundwork to do in Shanghai first and foremost. So the real focus on international expansion started summer 2016. And maybe later in the discussion, that's also something I can highlight in more detail, because we really take a thoughtful approach to the new markets that we target. And we take the time to do the research, to contact the local governments, and to do things in a responsible manner. So that's why the study, so to say, for international started months before we actually set foot there and started sending bikes, because we really want to have a thoughtful approach to our international expansion.
So how's your life now, Florian? What's a typical day for you look like, your responsibilities and job role?
Yeah, what I can say, it's pretty busy. I can say that for sure. It cuts out on a lot of other aspects of your life, but it's never unpleasant, because it's a great vision, and it's a great company, and it's really, really exciting. But it is definitely very intense. So on a daily basis, it's hundreds of mails. It's literally thousands of WeChats, and it's a real experience, and it's a real challenge to adapt your lifestyle to that. But if you can do it, it's really rewarding, because when you see the figures that we hit, and when you actually see people riding the bikes all day, every day, everywhere, it's incredibly satisfying. And that's something that is very different from what I was doing before, because my previous company was more B2B, and Mobike is obviously more B2C. So it's incredibly satisfying to work hard for something that you can actually see the result.
Well, now, Florian, so I'm a bit of a productivity geek, and so when you say, it's kind of a lifestyle choice almost. I'm really kind of
Oh,
curious,
definitely.
like how do you cope with all of this? How do you cope with being so busy? Are there routines or habits that you set up in order to deal with it?
Yeah, definitely. Like the first one that comes to mind is time division. So personally, I can't do mails anytime, anywhere. So I just carve out slots of the day, specific times where I just do mails. Um, WeChat, more or less same thing. I think it's really important to be focused during a face-to-face meeting. So I just turn my phone upside down. And then after every single meeting, again, you have to carve out in another 15, 30 minutes just to clear the messages that were inbound while you were talking to another real person. So I guess it's habits, routine, and just rules that you have to put in place in order to cope with the stress. Yeah.
Yeah, I always think of that. There was a short video put out by WeChat recently where they asked an entrepreneur to turn off his WeChat for 12 hours,
Uh-huh.
and the guy did it. And when he turned it back on, he was really anxious when he did it. And then when he turned it back on, he had 1,000 messages, not including group chats, right?
Yeah.
Just direct messages.
No,
Um,
definitely, definitely. WeChat is incredible. I'm sure. I mean, you guys know, and people listening also know about the power of WeChat. But it's really something when it took me to the next level, and when I got pulled into those hundreds of group chats and duplicates, and there's a lot of stuff that you have to filter. So going back to like the daily routines, I guess having strong personal beliefs and having a clear idea of how you want to handle people, conversation, topics in order to deal with those individual requests as efficiently as possible. That is super, super important. Same thing for LinkedIn, and same thing for the mails. Is just it requires a lot of rigor and a lot of a nice framework to know how to treat every single inbound request.
I want to go back to one point that you mentioned earlier there, Florian. Like you mentioned Mobike as being a rocket ship, which it
Yeah.
certainly is. I mean, it must feel like, yeah, quite a journey, quite an experience. But when you joined it, did you have an idea that it would be like this right now?
Well, I can't lie. I can't say that I knew we were going to raise Series B, C, and D, and plan to go to all those countries. I have to be honest, I can't say that I had all the plan and the details all worked out. But once I first saw the bike in action, I remember very precisely the first day the CTO scanned open a bike in front of me. I remember like almost like a butterfly feeling in my stomach and just the excitement because it's so cool. And just at that time, and again, I don't want to seem like I'm a visionary or anything, but I was just really excited by the potential. Just seeing the bike unlock made me realize that we could do a lot of things with this. We could go to many different countries, that it could scale up to a huge level. Like I saw a lot of very, very exciting things, but very long term. As to say, I knew we were going to go to that country and that country. No, that came later through analysis and through time and through scaling as well. But I did always feel like it was incredible. And to add on to that, it's not only the solution, the product, the app. For me personally, it was also very much the company culture, because my previous startup was mostly was actually, I mean, founded by four foreigners, and we had obviously Chinese people in the team. But it was always very important to me to go toward a more Chinese company, because I always say that, if you travel 10,000 miles from your home country to China, you'd rather go local, so to say. So in my work life, that's always something I had been drawn towards, and the fact that it was a fully Chinese team, Chinese funding, a Chinese innovation. That was something that was also extremely exciting to me because that's what I've been looking for the past, for my first 6 years in China. That's what I had been looking for. So that was also a very, very big part of why I was so excited.
So Florian, I just want to kind of get back to kind of the early days a little bit, and one of the things that I'm curious about, and so you mentioned that you didn't realize at the time that it would necessarily grow as quickly as it has. But was that growth, was that scale part of the early vision, the early strategy? I mean, was it always kind of part of the plan to just scale as big as possible?
Yeah, definitely. I can say two things. The first thing is like the personalities and the experience of the founders, and the second thing is the fact that the solution is pretty culture agnostic. And so I can go into a little bit more detail for each. The first one is that so we have three main co-founders. The founder and president is Hu Weiwei, and she's got about 12 to 15 years experience in mostly media circles in Beijing, and also focused on car industry. The CEO is Davis Wang, and he's got about 15, 20 years experience in very large companies like Google and others. And he was also Shanghai GM for Uber, and the CTO, the person who brought me on board, worked in connected cars and services in Ford and Chrysler for also about 15 to 20 years. And in the early days, when we were in the old office, when we were just sitting a few desks away from each other, I remember very clearly that they already had this vision. They knew exactly the track that they were on, and the way they were managing us and the way they're still managing us and the way that the company worked is very, very much focused on growth, getting new users, more bikes, more rides. And a year ago, it was very, very clear to them the path that we were onto. I think they all have, they're really visionaries. I really admire them because I think they have the perfect combined experience, and they have a very, very clear vision of where we're going. And so all along, I'm very sure that they know exactly what they're doing. They know exactly where they are. And the second one is the fact that the solution is pretty culture agnostic. So it works nicely in Shanghai or Beijing, two very different cities. Yes, one same country. But it also works very nicely in Singapore, where we launched about 2 months ago now. And we see a lot of different nationalities using the bikes. So we have over 150 different nationalities using the bikes in China and Singapore. And we have a lot of interest from other countries. So just inbound requests that come to us. And those requests come from all over the globe. So again, the fact that the solution is very culturally agnostic was also another indicator that the path would go like this, that we would scale so much and so fast and so big, and that we would have the chance to go to a lot of countries outside of China as well.
And so you mentioned a little bit about the co-founders and about kind of some how they're they've kind of had this vision all along. But I mean, what about like the values of the company? I mean, like what would you say, what like culturally, kind of what is tying the company together right now?
That's a real good question, and again, to highlight how much not control, but how much vision they have. Mobike, every single letter stands for a value, and so I can briefly run you through it. The M being move fast, and I think we don't need to explain a lot about that, but we've seen it in just a year. We've achieved almost 4 million bikes, over 700 million trips. The O is open-minded. So what I mentioned just now also mirrors nicely this open-minded attitude, whether it's internally or externally. The B is be bold. Again, I think that's pretty self-explanatory because the solution is really, really amazing, and it's a bold move. The I is innovation. Again, pretty self-explanatory. The K is knowledge-based leadership. So that's an insight that might answer your question a little bit more precisely. That's very much the way leadership operates within the company. And E is execution. And as any entrepreneur a good idea is great, but without execution or anything without execution, it equals to nothing. So execution is also very, very important in our company culture.
All in English as well.
Yeah, of course, we're a global company.
I've noticed that we were talking about it in the last podcast, how Mobike seems to have a bit of a better understanding of how marketing and branding works. You know, they're doing, you guys are doing some very interesting things with, for example, public artwork displays, which I've seen around in Shenzhen and a couple of other places. And also, you know, working together with other brands to create products outside of just biking, but you know, extending the brand into other areas. So, you know, how does this, you know, how would you describe this? What's the theory here? What's the goal? How does Mobike see itself as a brand?
I think a part of the answer is definitely lifestyle. Yes, it's an app, and yes, we have bikes, but it's more of a lifestyle. It's a new way to commute for short urban travels. That's really the value proposition, and it translates itself into a number of different physical events and things. So for those who live in Shanghai, there's the Vagas in Jing'an, which is co-branded with Mobike. So that's a real example of how we see cooperation with brands that share the same values, and then we do something fun with it. It's not only about business, and it's not only about the bikes, it's about the lifestyle, and it's about doing something fun. Also in Beijing, we have our new headquarters. It's dubbed Mobike World, and it's our headquarters. So obviously we've got offices there, but we've also got a coffee shop downstairs that's branded Mobike. We've got an exhibition hall with different models of bikes. We got pictures on the wall. Again, it's much more of a lifestyle thing than just a company. And why is it like this? Again, I really think it's because the vision originally from the founders included that part of lifestyle and that element of fun. I think it's been there all along, and I think it's also something that supports the business because, again, it's not just renting a bike, it's adopting a new lifestyle. It's making the smarter choice by choosing the smarter bike and being fashionable, you know.
Yeah, and we can go into some of those other kind of value propositions in a little bit, especially when it comes to, you know, data and things like that. But kind of going back to some of the things that we were talking about earlier in terms of early days. I mean, like what would you say was like a critical success factor for you guys, and also you know, kind of the flip side of that. What was perhaps one of the biggest challenges in terms of getting this rocket ship started, if you will?
So for the first part, you mean what was the secret recipe? What made it possible?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, like, was there like any like specific catalyst that really kind of like allowed you guys to take off?
On the higher level, and this answer might not satisfy you, but I'll get to more detail after. On a higher level, I think it's really the combination of it's just the right place and the right time, because smartphones are ubiquitous, because mobile payments are also ubiquitous. Chinese consumers are incredibly comfortable just trying new things and downloading a new app and just giving it a try. The infrastructure was also there to allow lots of bikes to roam the streets. So yeah, it was just the right time, the right place. It was the right combination of elements that created the spark. And then, if I remember, about a year ago, I can mention some things, but I can't really say that this is the thing that took it to the next level, because from my point of view, it's ongoing. Like every single week, we reach new milestones, and every single milestone is going to help us to get to the next one. So it's very, very much a continuous and a linear thing. Not a linear growth. It's actually an exponential growth, but it's an ongoing process. One thing that I can remember is I'll have to double check, but I think I remember it's a Shanghai vice secretary who visited our office in Yangpu And he decided to visit the office because he had seen the bikes on the street and he had heard about Mobike through a number of his connections and colleagues. But the elements that triggered him to come is when his son told him about Mobike, because his son was riding Mobike with his girlfriend, and the two of them just kept on telling this vice secretary, Mobike is so cool, you have to try it out. And at that point, when this city official saw his son, heard his son talk about it, that was the time when he decided to come and visit our office, and we showed him the solution in a bit more detail. So these kind of things happen, but again, they happen on a very regular basis because we're always growing.
Yeah, I remember in Shanghai a year ago, the early adopters were all kind of young couples. I remember distinctly seeing a lot of young couples riding Mobikes a year ago, just when it come out in Shanghai.
Yeah.
You mentioned something there, Florian, which I think is quite interesting. You mentioned one of the factors of getting traction and being in the right place at the right time being mobile payments. Now,
definitely.
You're in charge of international expansion, and it's well known that China's way ahead of the rest of the world in terms of mobile payments. So how does this, it's in the right time at the right place for China, but are we in the right time at the right place for the rest of the world?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'll talk more specifically about Singapore to highlight my answer. We don't expect Singaporean users to have the same Alipay or WeChat Pay tools, payment methods. But anywhere outside of China, ride-hailing apps and food delivery apps are also incredibly popular. And obviously their success is uncontested, and they don't rely on Alipay or WeChat. So it's just a different mindset. But it's not a hurdle to acquire users because the service is so convenient and so affordable, and because it's really a tangible value add to any urban dweller. So yes, the payment methods will be different, but then the user habits are also different. So we really don't see that as a hurdle to getting traction. No.
Interesting. So when we're talking a little bit about early days, and one of the things that I'm really kind of curious about is, and if you can give us some insight on this, is like the first actual bikes that were on the street. One of the things that people have complained a little bit about Mobike is that they're pretty darn heavy. I mean, I think they're about like the first ones were about 25 kilograms, which is quite heavy for a bike. And so one of the things that I'm really kind of curious about is in terms of like product development and iteration. So the difficulty of iterating on your hardware, but then also, what is it about the bikes themselves that perhaps set them apart from other bike sharing companies?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so the first thing that comes to mind, I'll just tell you straight away. Davis, the CEO, always says this. The bike that you saw a year ago, he said this when we launched on April 22nd. The bike that we used a year ago to launch, just consider it as iPhone 1. And now take your iPhone 7 out your pocket and try to compare the features and then the weight and everything of those two iPhones. It's night and day, right? Because you've had X iterations and because you had user feedback, et cetera, et cetera. So we very much think in the same way. We have our own R&D, we have our own design, and we constantly iterate on the bike and improve the bike. Improving the bike also comes through gathering user feedback, so it goes hand in hand, right? Everything about Mobike is different from the other bike share companies. I can't stress this enough. So the company was founded in January 2015, and as I mentioned, we launched in Shanghai on April 22nd, 2016. So during this year and 3 or 4 months, there was a lot of R&D, there was a lot of prototyping, there was a lot of discussions with the government, with potential users. There were a lot of iterations to get the right product market fit. And that's how the bike came to exist with the features that it has. So what I'm trying to say is that the bike fits a specific purpose and it's being built for that purpose, which is bike share. You can't use any kind of bike, a private bike or a mountain bike, for bike share because it's two different usage scenarios. You need the public bike to be sturdy, reliable, always available. You need it to last for many years because you're not going to change your bikes every 3 months. So there are a number of design criterias that we have to put in there. And then again, of course, we can improve on the bike and we can keep those design criterias and make the bike lighter and make it a smoother experience, et cetera, et cetera. But so the fact that it's got a full aluminum body means that it doesn't rust and that its lifetime is 4 years. So that's a critical component to the bike. And we're the only ones to have this kind of frame. The fact that it's got an embedded GPS on the bike, again, I can't stress enough how important this is. It's crucial because we know where every single bike is in real time. If somebody happens to pick up a bike and move it to the other side of the street, we know the bike has been moved because it's a fleet of IoT bikes. They're all actually connected machines in the Internet of Things. And so we manage this fleet in real time. So that's why I mentioned earlier responsible operations. You need to have a GPS embedded bike in order to have responsible operations. And then talking about the tires, the fact that they're only one-sided and that they're airless, again, these were taken into account in the design stage in order to have minimal maintenance on the bike so that we can operate more efficiently compared to other companies who still have air in their tires, so they literally need people to go around and pump air in the tire. We don't think that's a very sustainable business model, and we think that our bike with its features, its GPS, is the way to go for a sustainable business model and to operate in a responsible manner.
But still, it must be a little bit difficult. I mean, in terms of, hardware iteration is always difficult because it's a physical product, and it takes manufacturing. It takes, as you said, R&D. There's a lot of different things that go into hardware. But then it seems that bike sharing, it adds an even another dimension to that because you already have so many bikes out there. And so I'm curious, like, has it been difficult to the iteration itself, perhaps, in terms of like designing the bike, maybe not so difficult, but in terms of iteration, in terms of getting the old bikes off the street, introducing the new bikes, has that aspect been difficult?
Yeah, I understand. So I'll mention two things. The first one is actually there are two partnerships. The first one is with Foxconn. So they're helping us to raise our annual production capacity to 10 million bikes. And they're also helping us on the R&D front. So leveraging their experience and their supply chain and their skills, that helps us a lot in solving the kind of challenges that you mentioned just now. Apple partners with Foxconn, and they're doing a pretty good job at it. So we hope to leverage the same kind of support to solve these challenges. That's more for the production, manufacturing part. And then if you talk something that we're not yet at, but if you talk more of end of life, we also partner with companies who will help us to recycle the bikes, whether it's refurbishing the frame and then reusing it in the manufacturing process, or whether it's recycling or upcycling or whatever you want to consider. We also recently signed an agreement with a large state group to start looking at that in a very, very close manner. So that's also the kind of partner that'll help us to mitigate these challenges. And the last thing I can mention, which is more on the software or embedded software side, is that because all the bikes are connected, we can get information from them, and we can also send information to the bikes. So just like your iPhone can update wirelessly, our bikes are smart, and they can also learn and be upgraded without us having to physically go and get them. They can be upgraded remotely.
Oh, a bit like Tesla, where the software keeps improving.
Definitely, exactly like Tesla. So that's why Mobike really is a technology company. We're not a bike rental company. We're an IoT company solving the last mile problem. And then the bike obviously is the tool that we use to solve that problem because, again, a bike is pretty culture agnostic and it's pretty darn convenient. So it's the tool that we use to solve that problem. But at the core, we're definitely a technology company.
Yeah, I've always felt there's a very strong difference between how Mobike is approaching this problem to the other guys in the market.
So have I.
Right. It's nice to hear you succinctly describe that, actually. I've never heard someone describe it like that. That's pretty awesome. But we're going to shift gears and talk about a topic here that everybody is asking about. And I fully understand. I think me and John will understand that you might not be able to speak too directly as to some elements, but we do get a lot of questions about the investments that are going on in this market. So I'd just like to know, rather than talk about numbers, perhaps talk about how you view, in a very broad term, why this market is so hot, and what are the investors looking for here? What's their logic when they're investing these large sums into Mobike and other players in this market?
What I can say is that, first of all, we're super excited that we have such worldwide famous investors that share our vision. I think the answer really goes back to the vision. It's about providing a convenient, affordable, reliable means of urban transportation to solve problems like pollution and congestion. That's really the vision, the target. And we have a lot of investors that share this vision. I think it's so hot just because it's so convenient. It ticks all the items on a checklist, because again, it's affordable. It's there right when you need it. You can drop it off in an authorized parking location at the bottom of your compound or wherever you're going. It's affordable and it's ubiquitous. So it's so hot just because the solution makes so much sense, because it really fits an unmet need. It really, really fits an unmet need. And you mentioned earlier, you're right, that our first group of early adopters, maybe they were 2025, more tech savvy or sports lifestyle. But now we see that this has the user panel has widened so much. And if you sit at any crossroad, you can see that you got people from all ages and all walks of life, and Chinese and foreigners. Just anybody uses it. We've got users on the platform who are 70, 80, 90 years old. So it's incredible to see the reach it has. And I think it's got such a huge reach just because it is so convenient. And so for investors, obviously they support us because it's convenient and because it's got traction, but most importantly because they share the same vision. And that vision is more cities with more bikes and less pollution and less congestion. And what kind of investor would say no to an opportunity to do that?
So Florian, I'm actually going to challenge you a little bit on this one here, because the thing is, like, yes, of course, there might be less car congestion, but a lot of the bike sharing is introducing a bit more bike congestion.
So that goes back to the way in which Mobike is fundamentally different from all the other guys, because we're not just putting bikes on the street, we're putting a solution out. And so I mentioned a little bit earlier how the bikes are smart and how we can communicate with them and how we can operate efficiently. But it's not only about the bikes, it's also about two other elements that I can touch a little bit on. The second one is the AI platform. So we dub it Magic Square, and it's our cloud platform with its artificial intelligence that learns upon the data that we have to improve the efficiency of our operations. And again, that's something unique to us because we're the only ones to have the GPS in the bike. And so that is something that was built alongside the bike. It's not something that came after, when the craze started and when, yes, bike congestion started to happen. It was something that was built integrally in the solution from the beginning. And the third one is what we call the Mobike preferred location. And we're soon going to roll out the smart Mobike preferred location. We've already trialed it in Beijing with partners like Baidu. And the idea is to also have areas that are themselves connected in which the users can return the bikes. And so we incentivize the users to return the bikes to these locations. Maybe they'll get a credit or they'll get a reward of some kind. So again, we provide the solution. We're thoughtful in the way we put the bikes on the street because we provide the complete solution. It's not like we put the bikes out and then we think of a credit system to mitigate the challenges. No, it's everything's built since the beginning. And we've been pushing that very hard since the beginning. So to answer in one sentence your question, I think it's about the social responsibility of the company and the vision, because the solution is amazing. And if you think about it thoroughly, and if you discuss with all the stakeholders, and if you put resource and time into developing the solutions to mitigate those challenges, I think that's the right way to go.
When we look at investments, a lot of people are skeptical. Not me personally. I think I'm quite bullish on the market, but a lot of people are skeptical about how you actually, is this a sustainable business model? And how would the company answer that, you feel? You know, because the prices right now are quite low for these rides. You guys must be losing money.
I think the path to profitability is clear. I think we have proven the model by scaling from one city in April 2016 to over 50 cities. So just within a year, we increased, 50-fold. We went from a few thousand bikes to almost 4 million bikes. I think the path to profitability is definitely clear, and we're still in a very exciting period of growth. And again, going back to the investors, we're very excited that they share our vision, and I think the path is pretty clear.
Could you go into a little bit more detail about that?
No.
Okay. But in terms of the market itself, I mean, one of the things that Matt and I talked about actually on the last episode, so the information, about the different companies, including Mobike, number of users, bikes on the street, and things like that. One of the things that we talked about is that all of this information is very fractured, and it's very difficult to tell, how accurate or how credible certain information is from different sources. And so I'm curious. I mean, like, so from your end, I mean, how do you guys see that? And is there any way that you guys are dealing with that in terms of releasing information to the public?
I agree with you. Reading all those articles and living the Mobike growth for a little bit more than a year now, I have a different perspective on media as a whole, as I mentioned to you guys earlier. That's purely from a personal point of view, because now I know that you're reading an article and you have to be really careful about what's in there, whatever the topic, whatever the industry, just as a very, on the whole, media. I think it goes back to the way the company's managed. If you look back at the ride-hailing times, different companies had different habits, if I can use that word, in the way they release information, and what kind of information they release. And so I think it's more or less the same thing. We're a responsible company. We really care about the social responsibility linked to our business model. And I think it's the same thing in communicating to the media. It's just a way to do business, if I can just call it like this. We put out figures that are credible, and we share information that's true. I know that's what we do.
Yeah, because the information out there is just so messy. And you read one report and it says this, and then the next report has completely conflicting information. And we're not talking about sources here that are unreliable. These are the research firms that get regularly quoted. These are the ones that people look to for reliable information. So interesting that you've have you seen any things out there that, I mean, how far does it go? Would you say that there's a lot of untruths being published? Are people just publishing outright lies about the industry?
What I can say is that I've basically seen anything and everything. And just to add something, even those reputable sources that I would tend to trust, of course, they also look at things through their own prism. Everybody's got their own prism. So that explains how you can also get different outputs.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, I mean, speaking as someone in the media myself, I mean, it's just difficult sometimes because, I mean, at least for TechNode, and I know for Matt with China Channel as well, I mean, we want to be as accurate and as credible as possible, but sometimes the information just is not there. And so, for example, we have to go with numbers from iResearch rather than numbers from the companies themselves, because for whatever reason you guys don't want to disclose that. So for our end, at least, it's one of those things where some of the times you just got to go with what you have, and just be as cognizant as possible that it's not necessarily as accurate as you'd want it to be.
And don't get me wrong, I'm not criticizing, and I totally understand the situation you're in. It's just what I said just now was really from a end of the chain, like end of the chain point of view. If you only look at that figure in that article, then yeah, it could be black or white and true or false. But don't get me wrong, I totally understand the whole process behind and the process that you also have to go through. So yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
Okay, Florian, there's one thing you mentioned which I want to elaborate on. You said, okay, you're in 50 cities right now across China, right?
Way over 50 cities.
Yeah, sorry, over 50 cities. How far down are you guys going to go? Are we going to see Mobikes in the countryside? Are they going to be in the rice fields? Where does the expansion stop?
So again, going back to the artificial intelligence platform that we have, we can match supply and demand because we know exactly where the bikes are and we know exactly where the demand is because we've got the application. So we can very efficiently match demand and supply. So with the learnings from those 50 plus cities that we have, we're able to establish models that we can duplicate to bigger, smaller, or more remote cities, and then we can launch with the right number of bikes, and we can ramp up the number of bikes according to demand. So it's really hard for me to give you an answer because even in some rural areas, you could definitely use a Mobike. Maybe especially in rural areas, you could definitely use a Mobike because distances are greater. So from a user point of view, there's definitely a need. And then it's going to be thanks to our key learnings based on data that we're going to be able to say, we'll go here or we'll go there. It's really hard for me to pinpoint where it'll stop. But what I can say, again, is that it's so convenient and it's got so much traction and it really adds a huge value to people who live there that I would not be surprised if we had Mobikes in a lot of places.
And so the kind of the opposite of that. So the opposite of drilling down into China. And now we're kind of getting to the part where it's actually directly related to your job title. So when we're looking at overseas expansion, and we talked about it a little bit before, but what is the strategy? And so far you guys have expanded to Singapore, but are there plans to expand to other countries or other areas of the world?
So Singapore was really is really a success. So we had the launch event on March 21st. We got a lot of traction. We're working with universities, with the business partners, with shopping malls, We're also talking on a regular basis to the different government bodies to promote more cycling and to create a regulatory framework for the safe and responsible use of shared bicycle. So that was the first step. And Singapore has always been, in our mind, in the company's vision, the first step to international expansion. Because again, going back to a word I like a lot and that I used previously, the solution is very culturally agnostic, culture agnostic. So we believe there is definitely a need for more bikes in more cities. Again, if we want to fight pollution, congestion, anyone can think of, maybe not their home city, but anyone can think of a lot of cities in the Americas or in Europe or in other parts of Asia where we could use more bikes. So I can't just yet pinpoint anything, but I can definitely say that Mobike was the first step, and that, again, we'll see more bikes in more continents soon.
Singapore was the first step, right? So why Singapore?
Singapore was our first choice, mainly for two reasons. The first one, goes back to the government. So obviously in what we do, keeping communication channels open with the government and having regular meetings with the different bodies is very important. And in that regard, Singapore was really almost a pioneer, because the whole government is pushing for more cycling specifically, and more generally a greener lifestyle. So LTA, which is the Land and Transport Authority, which is the most relevant body for us to talk to in Singapore, they already put out schemes like the Walk, Cycle, Ride scheme, which promotes more walking, more cycling, using the MRT, so the train instead of taking the car. Another one that they are pushing out in partnership with national parks is the Park Connector Network, and it's a network of bike paths that run throughout the island. As of today, it's over 300 kilometers of bike path, and before 2020, it's going to ramp up to 700 kilometers. So these are a couple of examples of initiatives that the government has already put in place to promote more cycling. So that was definitely a huge element in the choice we made. And the second part of the answer could be, again, the general enthusiasm that we heard, that we got feedback from the universities, from the business partners. Going back to the investor topic, we also are very excited to have Vertex Holdings, who invested in our Series B last year, right before summer. And Vertex Holdings is a Singaporean structure, and it's part of Temasek, which is another Singaporean investment fund, the biggest actually. And most recently, Temasek also invested in our Series D. So this kind of validation, this kind of support from so a clear indicator of how our solution would be successful in Singapore.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
For the data, maybe I'll just add that it's obviously very important to us to respect all the privacy rules and to operate within a regulatory framework. So everything that's data related is also incredibly important in the company. So we've got entire teams looking only at this. It's not something we take lightly. And going back to the topic of international expansion, there are also country rules or North American or European rules that protect data rights, and that's something we're looking at very, very, very closely as well. Just like Google or Amazon would, because again, we're a tech company. So maybe I just wanted to add that on the data.
Looking back at the China market, I mean, bike sharing, the business model, the number of bikes in the street has just, exploded. There's exponential growth in terms of just the visibility of these bikes and the bike sharing companies. But one of the interesting things is that the Chinese government, and in particular municipal governments, at least in the beginning, they seem to be fairly hands off in terms of mandating certain standards, mandating that bikes be parked in certain places or that they be used in certain ways. And so I'm curious, from your end, I mean, like, how are you guys dealing with government regulation? How do you guys see the role of the government in bike sharing, and do you think that more regulation is going to maybe slow growth a little bit?
That's a great question, and to go back to what I mentioned previously about the R&D period, it's directly linked to that, because I mentioned that from January 2015 to April 2016, the team did all the iterations on the bike, finalized the solution, talked to all the stakeholders, including the government. And some of the key learnings that they got during this preparation period, so to say, got included in the bike. So, for example, it's got an aluminum frame and it can last 4 years, and it's got an embedded GPS. Let's take those two features. Their conversations got those design requirements in, and we pushed the solution out like this. And now a year later, the government has observed for a while and is now pushing out drafts for regulation. Some cities actually have laws that include these elements. So we're extremely excited that the government puts in place these regulations, because we want to operate efficiently and responsibly. And that's why we put the bike out there like it is. That's why it's got orange wheels, and that's why it's got a GPS. Everything was thought of prior to launching. So I'll take the example of Jinan, which is a city in Shandong, if I'm not mistaken. Jinan, before the bike share companies could go in, set up regulations. Those regulations stipulate that only GPS embedded bikes can operate. As a result, Mobike is the only bike share provider in Jinan, and it works incredibly well. The government helped us to draw thousands of white boxes on the sidewalks to create more parking space for those bikes. We cooperate with the government to further educate users on road safety, on bike parking, on behaving responsibly, et cetera, et cetera. And again, as a result, it's a huge success. And so bigger cities like Beijing and Shanghai are learning from cities like Jinan. They're also drafting such regulations that mention that the bikes should have an onboard GPS. They should last for a number of years. They should be autonomous. And we welcome that, because that's what the solution was built for in the first place. They thought of a very sustainable business model to roll out, not of something that's disposable and that you'll have to change within a couple of months. That's, again, a fundamental difference between Mobike and all the other guys.
But one of the challenges for the China market, in particular for what you guys are doing with physical goods, is that the regulations can be a bit fractured. So you might have a regulation in one city that says this, and then in a different city or a different province, the regulations are similar, but some of the specifics are a bit different. Has that been a challenge at all?
No, so far it's fairly homogeneous. To be honest, to my knowledge, it is totally homogeneous, and it's mostly based on autonomous bikes, smart bikes, GPS-enabled bikes. That's the main criteria. And longevity, how long can the bike last without maintenance or without a need of a major fixture? Those are the two main things. There has, again, to my knowledge, there is not a huge discrepancy from city to city. And actually, from some cities to some cities, it's exactly the same. So Jinan is one amongst some cities in which only Mobike is authorized to operate. So the standards are fairly similar.
Interesting.
Okay. Well, I guess we're coming to the end. My final point, I just want to squeeze in before we finish up, is about how does Mobike view their mini program? What is Mobike's how would you describe Mobike's view about their mini program? Because Mobike is, put forward by the WeChat team as almost the go-to case study for mini programs. And there's a lot of speculation, about people. Oh, is this actually, how does this work with your app as well? What's the conflict? Is there a conflict there between the mini program and the app? And how does Mobike view the value that the mini program is giving to the company?
I definitely don't think there's a conflict. I think it's kind of like the different bike models that we have. It fits different user needs, and some people will prefer the app, which I personally prefer. Some people don't have space on their phone, so they have to use WeChat. Some people will just prefer using the WeChat mini app. I definitely don't think there's a conflict. I think it's just fitting different user needs or user habits, because the features are the same in both. You have your red packet bike in both, and you have the same features. You can register, log in both. So I don't see a conflict. Another thing I can add is that we're also excited to have Tencent as an investor. And so our relationship with WeChat is obviously a very close one. So you might have noticed that WeChat not only has the mini program, that Mobike not only has the mini program, but it's also one of the 9 featured services right in the WeChat wallet. So it's amazing for us. We have access to their 800 or 900 million users, and it's a very smooth user experience. So I don't see a conflict between that and the app. I just think it's another relay for growth.
Well, that's about all the time that we have. Thank you again, Florian Bohnert, the head of international expansion for Mobike, for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your very busy day to tell us more about what's happening.
Now I'll have to go check my 50 or 100 emails.
Exactly. And to all of our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, we would really appreciate it if you went into iTunes and gave us a good review, or if you just shared this on social media. Again, thank you so much, and we'll talk to you next week.